Thanks very much, Mr. Sharma, for being with us here on ET Now. I first want to begin talking to you about the Parliament session because a lot of stakeholders in Indian economy are looking at this session with much hope and with much despair. Let me first talk to you about the session that just ended. The monsoon session was a washout, and you know, we can blame both the government and the opposition for that. But if I were to ask you, stakeholders of the Indian economy would want to know what is the Congress's stance going to be in the winter session of Parliament, because your stance will perhaps determine the course of a lot of economic decisions, and which is why I want to ask you, particularly in the light of the fact that Mr. Jaitley has had a few meetings with some of your senior leaders, of course on the pretext of giving his daughter's wedding card, but he did have a meeting with Rahul Gandhi himself, and we're given to understand that the winter session of Parliament was indeed discussed. So what will be the Congress's stance on in the winter session of Parliament?
As a stance of the opposition should be to raise issues which are of national concern. And also there have been developments in the intercession period which do warrant attention and discussion both. We should be very clear when you are referring to the stakeholders' despair. Why should there be any despair? And despair is not then something which is new. That should have been there for the last 7-8 years. When the BJP was in opposition and they didn't allow the parliament to function, they didn't allow the parliament to take up the legislative business, they derailed the legislative agenda of the then government. Now, in the last 1 year, they were fortunate to have an opposition which was not having a partisan agenda. And as a result, more business was transacted in the first 3 sessions. That's how you had the land boundary agreement with Bangladesh, the constitutional amendment. You had the insurance bill, which BJP blocked for 7 years, which was passed. Let's look at the positives. Now, if last session was a washout, the responsibility or the blame of that squarely lies with the Prime Minister and his government, because they did not heed to the urging of the combined opposition that the Prime Minister reassures the country with regard to the commitment of his government to uphold the constitutional rights of the citizens and also the secular fabric of the country. Why it was important? Because his ministers were making statements. Now, nobody else could have spoken to us. Yes, the leader of the House in Rajya Sabha, Arun Jaitley, did speak, but
you would have wanted the Prime Minister to take the lead and break his silence.
The Prime Minister can either take action against his ministers or reassure. But the Prime Minister remained obdurate.
There's a reason why I went back to the stakeholders in Indian economy phrase. And you're right, stakeholders of the Indian economy should have been worried even when the Parliament was being stalled in your tenure.
No, for 7 years.
I grant you that. The reason why I'm asking you this question today, sir, is that there is a very important legislation in the form of the GST that the country would want to see.
Yes, the country wanted to see it, in fact, about, again, 5 years ago.
So let me ask you
now GST was tabled by us. We are the authors of the GST.
That's right.
But let me be very clear here. One is the legislative agenda of the government of the day. Fine. We are the authors of the GST. We are in favor of GST. But we want a GST which genuinely creates a common market in India and brings down the transaction costs so that the burden both on the producer and the consumer is reduced. Now, we have certain reservations because of the compromise.
I want to speak to you, yes. I want to speak to you about your reservations, and I'm going to come to
let me make one thing clear here. Parliament session is not only about the government's legislative agenda. It cannot be reduced to one bill. It's the Parliament of India. It's the highest forum of discussion and debate on all issues which are of national interest and concern, and that's what the opposition's duty is.
Because you represent the opposition on every economic issue that either faces the government or faces the country at large, I have a very blunt question to ask of you, and you rightly said you are the authors of the GST. Would you then not want to see this legislation go through?
Of course we would, but it cannot be rubber stamped. We have raised our reservations. These are on record. The select committee report is there. It's up to the government to respond to those reservations and concerns and meet our demands. Government has to revert to us. They cannot say that this is our bill. They have made big concessions and compromises in their desperation to pass the bill. First you block it for 5 years, then you become desperate, then you make concessions. This is not a partisan issue. We would like to make it clear. The concerns that we have flagged are neither political nor partisan. It's in the interest of the tax reform. It's in the interest of creating a common market. Now, we fail to accept a few things. One is that 1%
I was going to ask you
cascading
this
tax.
question. What is it that, if can be done, will get the Congress on board on the GST legislation?
As of
Because
now,
you will appreciate the fact, and you understand economy and you've understood economic decisions, but you will appreciate the fact that there is political grandstanding on both sides.
no, there is no political grandstanding.
So what are the things that will get you on board?
No, first, there is no justification to have this 1% cascading tax when all the states are being compensated for the revenue losses.
Okay.
Number one, for a period of 5 years.
I understand.
Which we had demanded,
levy.
and that additional levy, we cannot accept that. Second, because we understand that it is a destination-based tax. Second thing is about the dispute resolution. Third is about the cap. The way it has been tailored so far, unless and until some drastic changes are made, it will make India's GST one of the highest in the world. You are talking of or looking at something like 24-25%. So is it legitimate on our part to ensure that the burden on the consumer and producer is brought down to demand from the government to put a cap? Whether they put it at 18%, 20%, but they should make it clear. It cannot be vague. And another very fundamental issue is, how do you keep petroleum products out?
And alcohol as well.
And alcohol and electricity. Where's the justification? Petroleum is diesel and petrol are the biggest multiplier when it comes to transaction costs because of transportation. Now, when that is a fact, how do we address this issue?
Right.
You cannot have a situation where you have in Delhi, diesel is at 60 rupees, in Chennai at 70 rupees, or Ahmedabad at 75 rupees. How can you accept this? And how can the government justify?
I agree with you there, but the reason why, and this is again a view that's coming in from the Treasury benches, and they say that the reason why we have done that is to get the states on board. So a lot of people believe it is okay to go with a half-baked GST. At least let's make a beginning. Doesn't that find favor with you?
Do you realize that as of now, the way it is structured, when you look at the central and the state GST, it will be anywhere between 23 and 25%, plus this 1% transaction tax, additional levy. Plus you have kept petroleum and alcohol out. Why? Well, how do the states benefit or lose? You are creating a room for additional burden on the industry and also on the consumers. It's not fair. And states must be told when the states are not losing any revenue, and same goes for revenue. There are studies for the alcohol that 40% of the excise is evaded when it comes to alcohol. Now, if you bring it within the net of the GST, the states stand to benefit actually.
Okay, so let's talk step by step, and I appreciate the points that you've raised because these are the points that Indian industry is also raising. But let's go step by step, and there are signs within Finance Ministry, and which is why we are tempted to believe that they could perhaps be budging on their own stand. They may perhaps accommodate a few of your demands.
They're not obliging us. That would be the correct thing to do.
No, they're not obliging you, but 1% additional levy is likely to go. If that were to happen, will the Congress be on board?
It cannot be piecemeal. Let the government come back to us. There has to be a constructive engagement.
But you raised an objection on 1% additional levy. If that were to go...
There's also the dispute resolution mechanism. That
the
has
reason
to be
I'm
resolved.
asking that question, sir, is that the government is willing to walk a few steps here. Will you be also willing to walk a few steps, reach a compromise, and get the GST started?
Well, if that was not the case, we would not have made these concrete suggestions or recommendations in the select committee, which we did.
So the 1% additional levy is a big bone of contention. The other big bone of contention, like you rightly suggested, was the revenue neutral rate.
Revenue neutral rate.
What is the rate with which you are comfortable with?
It must not be above 20% in any case.
Not above 20% in any case?
No, but then you cannot keep multiple windows open, which I have referred to. So there has to be a time-bound commitment. You are going for a constitutional amendment which will have far-reaching implications. For the first time after independence, you are reforming the tax structures. And when you are making such sweeping changes, you have to ensure that you are progressive in your approach and also correct. Now, you cannot keep on having amendments periodically. This is not going to happen for many years more. So, when will the GST on petroleum also kick in, on alcohol also kick in, must be factored in now. It
so
cannot
you don't
be,
want that to be an open-ended statement. You need the timelines to be specified as well.
It will be very difficult for us to accept that it is a progressive move forward when you are keeping the biggest multiplier in transaction cost, that's the petroleum and diesel, out.
You know, sir, there are some reports that seem to suggest that the panel, the Chief Economic Advisor-led panel, Arvind Subramanian, who's going to be submitting this report, are likely to perhaps recommend a differentiated GST rate for various products. Is that going to be counterproductive, and is that something that you're going to oppose?
It's not a question of blindly opposing or supporting. We have to see these proposals in black and white and make a very honest and open assessment about its positives and negatives.
You have seen Parliament function for decades now, and which is why I think it's only apt for me to ask you a very candid question. As things are, and as the signs that are coming from North Bloc about some conciliation being reached, some compromises being made, what is the possibility of the Constitutional Amendment Bill of the GST going through in the winter session of Parliament? Will you say likely, or will you say highly unlikely?
Well, I think all possibilities are there. It will be very difficult for me to make a definitive statement because the government has yet to come back to us.
So when you say all possibilities are there, what are the possibilities that make it likely, and what are the possibilities that make it unlikely?
Government has to respond to our demands. And if we are satisfied with the government's response, surely we would like to see the GST to go through.
Mr. Sharma, as one of the most seasoned voices in Indian Parliament and one of the most senior leaders of the Congress party on economy-related matters for certainly and even otherwise, do you see GST making a debut on the 1st of April next year?
Well, I can't say that because whether we are prepared, it's not easy. It's fairly complex. The details are still being worked out. You are talking about serving the final wedding dinner when you are still buying groceries or looking for supplies. They have not worked out the details. As you are saying, there is a committee under Arvind Subramanian still working at it. The empowered committee of the finance ministers has still not resolved issues.
That's right.
And despite the government having made
the beginning has to be made with the Constitutional Amendment Bill, then of course states ratifying it, the 3 other legislations passing through the IGST.
So look at the time required. We are already talking on the 24th of November. So hypothetically speaking, even if some things were to move, I don't think that 1st of April looks realistic to me. So you don't rush through half-baked constitutional amendments and bills. Let the government also realize these people should not become impatient. We are receptive, but they have to be responsive to our demands. So
what you're essentially saying is that even if the GST bill were to go through in the winter session of Parliament, April 1, 2016 is not a realistic deadline.
Whether the states are ready, whether they have the infrastructure ready. You don't have even the basic details now as to what will be the aggregate, what will be the cap.
You know, while the government is trying to send feelers to you and trying to send feelers to the Congress party, they are also opening channels of communication with an SP, a TMC, a TRS, an AIA, DMK.
They are free to do so.
Absolutely. But do you believe at some level you could get isolated on the GST bill?
Why should we be isolated? The government was saying that we will be isolated on many issues in the past. Who was isolated? It was the government. If they want to live in their own world, they are welcome to do so. And this government must also know that wisdom lies in treating the opposition and the principal opposition party with respect. And for that matter, all the other opposition parties. I don't think they are going to make much headway and hoping that they will isolate the principal opposition party. Without Indian National Congress, no constitutional amendment is possible. That I can make a definitive statement.
So without the Congress on board?
Well, they can do headstand then. If that is going to be their approach, then where is the conciliation?
I have a bigger, larger question to ask of you, because you have been a victim of Parliament being obstructed and people justifying it, saying this is a legitimate form of democratic protest.
That's the present finance minister.
Yes, he said that in the past. I'm presuming he perhaps regret making that statement. But let me ask you, as somebody
he has made many statements.
As somebody who's been a victim,
many statements.
Fair point. As somebody who's been a victim of obstructionist politics, the question that some of us sometimes wonder is that who cares about the interest of Indian economy?
Let me tell you.
Should it be the government alone, or should it be the opposition as well?
Both. We all are stakeholders. This is our country. As I have said, we are not making a partisan political points. BJP, it opposed principally then the land boundary agreement.
That's right.
They said it's against the interest of the country. You read their speeches on the floor of the House. Then they had a change of heart with the change of side. Similarly, on the insurance bill, read what they said and what they did. We have not made such contradictory statements. We are not BJP. That when we are in opposition, we say insurance, FDI in insurance is bad, and when you're in government, it's good. Or GST is bad when you're in opposition, GST is good when you're in government. When we were in opposition earlier, we were very constructive in our engagement during Atal Bihari Vajpayee's time. Again, in government, what we have said that the GST is good, we still maintain that the GST is good. So we are not going for U-turns, nor are we being obstructionists. The question, Supriya, here is that in a country which has so many issues, multiple issues, you have agrarian distress, you have farmers committing suicide, rising unemployment, you have an economy which is struggling or sputtering, it's not a surging economy. The GDP growth rate is flat,
That's right.
actually flat, by what the numbers are coming out. And that is when this government has the comfort and the cushion of saving almost $90 billion in the oil import bill.
Right.
Now they say that their exports are falling for the last 11 months. I was astounded to read the statement from the minister that it's because of the commodity exports have fallen. Since when has India become an exporter of metals and commodities? Please look at the numbers of the last 10 years.
Yeah.
So what I'm saying, there are serious issues which we have and which we need to discuss. At the same time, there are also issues of social stability and constitutional guarantees and constitutional rights, so that creative people have the freedom and the space to function, whether you're an author or a scientist or a writer or a filmmaker. If they feel stifled, and if there is any protest, the government in a democracy should listen. The government may not agree with those who have a complaint to make, or the government may agree.
You can't block out voices of protest.
It's not only blocking out. They are condemning them and humiliating them and threatening them. Now, these are issues which will have to come up. As I said, Parliament is not a structure or a house which is meant to rubber stamp the legislative agenda of the government. Elected representatives of the people in the Parliament of India have a duty. It's not only their privilege and right, that is separate, but they are duty bound when it comes to the people to raise issues. And the Prime Minister should not take every question so personally and treat the opposition as enemy. The Prime Minister treats the opponents as enemies, not opponents or adversaries.
So as somebody who's been a part of parliamentary democracy, and given the climate that we are seeing in our country right now, we also have a very galvanized opposition thanks to the big Grand Alliance victory in Bihar. Do you expect the winter session to perhaps be a washout, like a lot of people
We don't want that to be a washout. It's up to the government. I hope that the Prime Minister...
What will make the winter session a success?
Let the Prime Minister come and debate the issues. Let his government be open about it. Let them not block debate. You block debate outside. You block debate in the civil society. You block all protests. You suppress the voices of dissent, which is essential in a democracy. And then you don't want Parliament to debate, then what will happen to our democracy? We are making it very clear there should be healthy discussion. It's the highest forum of debate in our democracy, and Prime Minister should realize that he cannot treat the Parliament of India as the Gujarat Assembly. What has prevented states from taking land when required for major infrastructure projects or building of cities? Take the recent case of Andhra. It has happened. So which law is coming in the way? I would like to know. Other states have their annuity models.
A lot of experts believe the government will be suicidal if they even touch upon land in this session, and they should just stay away from land. But I have a bigger question to ask of you, and I'm going to close it with this question, that a lot of investors that we speak to, whether they're global investors or whether they're domestic investors, they all fear that after 18 months, and given the political logjam on many issues, whether they are economic or political, what is perhaps going to be traded off is the reform drive. The government has a bit of a political grandstanding that they are doing. The opposition obviously doesn't want to play ball. What is going to break this political logjam? Because at stake really is India's economic future.
No, I think I would like to convey this to the investors. We had all this grandstanding. We had logjams. But yet India's GDP quadrupled during UPA 1 and UPA 2. Our exports more than quadrupled. So it's not that, and India remained a favored destination for the investors. So this economy has resilience, this economy has enormous potential, and this country will continue to grow. Its economy will continue to grow. One bill and one session delay is not going to bring the heavens down. That's not going to happen. We are a mature democracy, and it should not be viewed, when we talk of the functioning and also a parliament, from a narrow prism. You have to take a comprehensive, a broader view. I'm sure that issues can get resolved because we have to function. But at the same time, as I have said, opposition has a duty, government has a responsibility. The government must now learn how to constructively and respectfully engage with the opposition, because one thing I'm very clear about, this government, but for few ministers, has a dearth of talent. There is centralization of decision making, centralization of policy making. There is concentration of power in a PMO, which is actually top heavy. It's the biggest PMO we have seen, and everybody is talking about that. You know, the Prime Minister is more, and his PMO is more busy in keeping surveillance, keeping tabs, and everybody knows that. But what is important is, it is a confused PMO. India is a diverse country.
You need to have more empowered ministers.
No, governance is complex. Empowered ministers, empowered secretaries. You can't have empowerment of one and disempowerment of all.
Fair point indeed, sir. I will ask you a very candid question, because this just comes to my mind before we close. Objectively speaking, do you believe too much is being made out of the GST, and it's not going to be such a
Of course, I do not know what is this drum beating about, and what are these reforms. Many of them are procedural reforms, even in the FDI recently. And there are some fundamental departures where we have reservations. But after all, this has been an ongoing process since 1991. 1996, the FDI policy came, and there were a lot of changes which were made even in the UPA 2, as you would know. So most of the sectors have been open to FDI. So this government is trying to mask its failures, because first Narendra Modi and the BJP made lofty promises. They promised the sun, moon and the stars to the people and to the world. Now they are unable to perform. Now they are saying of a reform agenda. No, it is non-performance. It's incompetence of the government. It cannot be a country of India's size, an economy of $2.3 trillion, its future and its survival is not linked to one bill.
So then do you agree with me when I say that perhaps given the government's own if I may say, inability to break ranks with the opposition and to get them on board, we will perhaps see these executive decisions take place, but the legislative agenda is never going to really take off?
Yes, the government is better advised to have a consensual approach and not a confrontationist one.
On that note, sir, thank you very much for speaking to us. You're always a voice of sanity as far as Parliament, India's democracy and big economic decisions are concerned. Mr. Anand Sharma there, an exclusive conversation here with ET Now.
Find us on Facebook at facebook.com/ETNow and don't forget to click the like button. You can also follow us on Twitter at ETNowLive. To stay updated with all our programming, hit the subscribe button on our YouTube channel by logging on to youtube.com/user/ETNow.